Hello, I am Tammy Marshall, and I've got my rarely used beach hat and beach outfit on so I can read you a portion of my beachy novel. It's a suspense book called Trouble on Tybee. I'm going to be reading chapter 5 today, so if you haven't heard the beginning of the book, you can go back and watch those videos first, or you can watch them after this one if you find this one interesting. So, this is called Trouble on Tybee, which is Tybee Island, Georgia. I do not live in Tybee Island, Georgia, though I wish I did. It would be nice to be there right now in the summertime, which when I'm reading this to you. So anyway, here is chapter 5 of my suspense mystery called Trouble on Tybee. Chapter 5 is called The Will. I sat on the beach, letting the fine spray dampen my hair and skin, and gazed out over the Atlantic's expanse. My mind stayed with the novel lying on the beach blanket beside me. I brought it to the beach, thinking I might read a few pages, but once I opened it, I found myself so caught up in the world of Mother's imagination that I couldn't put it down, even to take in the gorgeous ocean view. I finally set it down only after an errant frisbee landed at my feet. Before leaving the house, I took Spill the Salt from Mother's bookcase where it was shelved next to Danger Zone. Mother seemingly had placed her novels on the shelf in the order in which she'd written them, so that's the order in which I planned to read them. This second novel began shortly after the conclusion of Danger Zone, so it made sense for me to read her books chronologically to see if the remaining novels continued the saga of Carl Green, like Spill the Salt was doing. Green arrived in Salt Lake City and found a job working in a hangar at a small regional airport known for employing ex cons. The manager barely blinked at his unkempt appearance. He was too impressed with Carl's considerable knowledge of airplanes and his extensive flight experience. Carl began work, and for a while at least, left his stalking, murderous days behind him. Then Mitchell Conroy, a small time drug runner, entered the picture and hired Carl to fly missions for him on the side, mostly at night. It wasn't long before Carl was doing deals on the side, too, and Mitchell caught on and threatened Carl with a variety of bodily harm. Carl appeared to repent of his ways until one night when he met Mitchell in the hangar, cold cocked him with a wrench, bound and gagged him, weighted him down with heavy chains, flew out over the Great Salt Lake, and dumped Mitchell out to drown and then sink into the depths of the lake, where the heavy salt concentration would make short work of his remains. Carl had got the idea from the military regime of Argentina in the 1970s, who had done the same thing to its victims over the deep Atlantic Ocean. As I watched the small waves gently roll into shore, I shuddered to think of all the people who had lost their lives at sea and whose bones littered the ocean's floors all over the world. I shook my head to clear it of the morbid thoughts. Then I rose and dusted the sand off my skin and shook it from my blanket. Even though the sea was a terrifying place at times, it was so breathtakingly beautiful that I understood why my mother had been so captivated by its magic that she left Iowa, as well as my brother and me, for good and never returned, not even for a visit at Christmas. I walked back to Mother's house and rehydrated. Then I stretched out on the couch under the front picture window to finish her second novel. After dumping Mitchell into the lake, Carl flew Mitchell's plane toward Los Angeles. Once he was north of the large, sprawling city with its lights shining off to his left, he set the autopilot, parachuted into a vast field of lettuce, ditched the parachute in an old shed, and hitched a ride into LA. Somewhere over the Pacific, Mitchell's small plane ran out of fuel and plummeted into the ocean. An early morning fisherman saw the plane go down, but by the time he reached the place where it had crashed, the aircraft was already on its way to the bottom of the ocean. His radio wasn't working, so he called it in once he got back to land. And then a search and rescue helicopter crew spent the rest of the day canvassing the ocean around the area of the crash for survivors. None were found, of course. Eventually, a connection was made between the missing airplane from Utah and the missing Mitchell Conroy, but no one connected those two disappearances to Carl Green. because he had submitted a letter of resignation the day before the disappearance, and he had told his boss that he was heading to Texas. Once again, Carl mistakenly believed he could start afresh somewhere new and leave his murderous past behind him. If he couldn't leave it behind him, where would he run to next? He'd gone as far west as he could. Suddenly, I was startled out of my reading coma by the shrill ringing of Mother's landline phone. I made a mental note to turn down the volume of its ring. It was set to a level that could wake the dead. I walked toward her office, breathing deeply and slowly to allow my heart rate to stabilize. Yet I still managed to answer the phone after its fourth ring. It took my addled brain a moment, though, to place the voice of the man who didn't bother to identify himself. He asked, "How's the sorting going?" "Fine," I replied as I waited for my cerebral cortexes to all fire together. "Good, good. Have you found what I asked you to look for?" A familiar throat clearing cough echoed down the line. I blew out a short sigh of relief as recognition hit me. "Oh, Milt, Frank, sorry. No, I haven't found any new novel manuscript. Just some short stories on her computer. They seem to be connected, but I haven't read them all yet to find out. Could they be the book you were promised?" "Seems unlikely. Sylvia wasn't one to write, let alone compile short stories into a collection. How many are there?" I slid into Mother's office chair and logged onto her computer. I'd been considering changing the password to something not so discomforting, but I hadn't yet done it. I scanned the story icons. There seemed to be 18. Frank grunted. "Well, can you send me a few? I can read them and look for a common thread or see if they have the potential to appeal to our readers. You said you haven't read them all?" I shook my head. "No, I got caught up in reading her first two novels instead. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I'd never read them before. Once I tried reading a couple of Mother's later books, but I couldn't get into them." Yes, I recall Sylvia telling me that you and John weren't big on reading." Well, I hemmed and hawed a bit. "I do read, Frank, but I prefer what Mother would have called fluff stories." "Ah, happy ending reader, huh?" "I guess. Randall, my husband, teases me about my Hallmark Channel obsession." "Nothing wrong with that," Frank asserted. "There are some fine movies to be found on that channel." I laughed and tried to picture the old man named Milton Francis sitting at home watching romance movies with a box of tissues next to him like I usually needed. But who was I to judge? If he liked those movies, I certainly could understand why. "You'll get no argument from me, Frank. In fact," Frank added, "two of my best clients are romance writers who crank out a few books every year and make me enough in commission to afford the best seats at the Broadway shows I love to take in when I'm visiting the New York City offices." I was attempting to attach some stories to an email, so I was only half listening to him. "Tell me your email address so I can send these stories to you." He did, and I sent the message. Frank confirmed that he'd received it and that he could open each of the files. "Seems you inadvertently sent me your mother's will, too." "Her what?" I scanned the five icons I'd sent him. "Yes, there's one here titled, 'A Mother's Will Be Done.' It's not a story, it's Sylvia's will." I opened the file and was surprised to find a copy of Mother's will, dated only 6 months ago, and bearing the title that Frank had read to me. Why would she title her will as if it were a story? Frank made a non committal noise on his end. "I don't know, but from what I see here, it looks like you are the full executor of her estate and the new owner of her house." "What?" I heard the squeak in my voice. "Where does it say that?" He told me where to look, and I read the lines in disbelief. I gasped. She cut John completely out of everything? Why would she do that? "I don't know. She always spoke highly of both you and your brother to me, but I have to admit that I don't really recall the last time she and I had a conversation about either of you. Mostly, we just discussed her books and her rarer and rarer book appearances and signings." "I can't believe this. How am I supposed to tell John? I just talked to him this morning and he agreed to give me a month to sort things out here before selling the house and splitting the proceeds." Perhaps you don't have to be the one who tells him. What do you mean? Well, only you and I so far know of the existence of the will. If you think it would be too hard on you to follow through with what it says, pretend you never found it. I promise to keep its contents a secret. After all, he's still a beneficiary where her royalties are concerned. I stared at the screen. My mind was reeling. I'll think about it, thanks. No problem. For now, let me read what you've sent me. I'll be in touch in a few days. Will you still be at her house? Yes, I'm planning to stay on and sort everything. He chuckled. Well, nobody can make you leave. According to her will, you own the house and everything in it. I looked around her office and imagined making it my own. It's a lot to take in right now. I'll do my best to try to get through her stories. We said our goodbyes and I hung up. Leaning back in her chair, I crossed my arms over my chest. Why didn't you tell me about your will, Mother? More importantly, why didn't you tell John? Then I had a crazy thought that caused me to frown. Did John know? Was he trying to get me to sell the house soon in the hope that I would never find out that Mother had made a will? Where was the official copy of it? I read the bottom of the scanned copy and found the name of the lawyer who had drafted it for her. She was a local attorney. Hmm. Well, Miss Abigail Forrest, I do believe I'll be paying you a visit. And that will happen in chapter 6. Stay tuned.